Welcome back to another episode of Health is Wealth. And thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. And as always, I am beyond grateful and thankful from the bottom of my heart to each and every one of you who is tuning in to today's episode and tuning into the podcast. As every week on Sundays, I drop a new episode, just sharing thoughts and words, things that are going on in my head, things that I'm learning on my own ride and quest on this crazy ride that we call life. Things, that I'm learning for the first time, things that I'm just seeing in another different point of view in hopes that it brings value into your life today, whether it be through inspiration or motivation. Maybe you're hearing something for the first time, or you yourself are hearing something and just see it in a different point of view. And if anything else, just get a chance to know who I am, get a chance to know the mission that I am on in life and just what I am all about. So again, thank you for being here. And on this week's episode, what I wanted to talk about was, what if you only had 5 years left? How drastically would that change a lot about how we operate in the day-to-day life? Sometimes it feels as if we think life doesn't really apply to us, right? We understand that there's a beginning and an end to all of this. We watch it happen around us all the time. But because I don't believe, the fact that it's obviously happened to us yet, if you're watching this, somehow we don't think those rules apply to us, right? And unfortunately, life, is unfair this way because we don't really have an end date that we know of, right? We go through our lives hoping that we're going to live these full lives, hoping to be 70, 80, 90, 100 years old. But as we see in life, it can happen to anybody at any age, at any time, for any one reason. And so I say all of this just to remind us of, being that life can happen as it does, we just don't know how long we do have. And I think because it doesn't seem so surreal to us, it feels like we've got forever. It feels like, we can get around to things whenever we feel like it, because we feel we've got all the time in the world, when in actuality, that's not the reality of it. We don't have all the time in the world. And I believe truly that we do have more time, or we believe we have more time than we actually do. But yet we wait around, wait for things to happen, put things off. Maybe one day I'll trace that dream. Maybe one day I'll pursue that passion. Maybe one day I'll figure out what my purpose is. Maybe one day I'll get around to it. Not maybe ever realizing that, maybe that one day when our time is up is coming a lot sooner than we realize. Because just because you're young doesn't mean you've got until you're 80 or 90. That's just not how life works. It's not that everybody who's born is guaranteed X amount of years in life. We all understand this, right? And I know it's not, the happiest of topics, to discuss, right? But the point of this discussion is to bring the awareness and the seriousness of it all. Because what if that was a reality? What if you were given a crystal ball and it says, hey, you've got 5 years left. So what are you going to choose to do with it? Could we only imagine how differently we would think? The reason we act the way we do and feel like we've got all the time in the world and feel that we aren't rushing is because we all have that expectancy of living until we're 70, 80, 90, 100 years old. And so when you're in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, you think, I still got plenty of time here. Not realizing that, maybe there's a sickness coming your way in your future. Maybe, unfortunately, you might be in an accident, God forbid, right? But again, we got to be truthful about this. Something's going to happen to one of us, at some point in life. We just don't know when or where or how. That's the unfortunate part. That could be the uncertain and scary part. But again, what if there was a crystal ball that said, hey, you know what? You got 5 years. Just how would that change your life now, right? How would that change everything about the things that you put off, the things that you say you're going to do next week. Maybe the way you move, maybe again, you just don't feel like you're in a hurry because you feel you got all this time left. But what if it was sooner than you realize? How much more urgently would you move? How much quicker would you move? I think about this from time to time because I am getting older. I'll be 40 this year, and realize that I've been able and grateful enough, and fortunate enough to live this long already when I know there hasn't been when not everybody's had the opportunity to do so. Now, of course, like many people, I hope to get another 40, 50 years out of my life, but I just don't know when that's going to happen. So I think about it now because as I realize that there's probably more days, less days, available to me than more days than I've lived in life. I try to take things more seriously now because even if I hope to live another 50 years, right, that may not be what's in my, And so knowing that, I ask myself, am I doing enough? Am I working hard enough? Am I pushing fast enough? Am I being urgent enough? Because what if I only had 5 years left, right? And I've got a whole bunch of life I still want to live. How many things in life then would become just not so important, and how many things would then become important when I would prioritize, and I think thinking that way might shake us up a bit, and really kind of help prioritize our focus. Like, ask yourself that, again, what if there was a crystal ball that just said, hey, you've got 5 years to live, my friend. Like, I know you wanted 20, 30, 40, 50 more years, but, it looks like we only got 5 more years for you. Really think about how much would change in your life today. How many things that you would normally just put off would you then decide to do right now in the moment? Because now that time is ticking, and it's ticking faster than you thought. What about pursuing those dreams? The one day I'm going to start that. The one day I'm going to build that. The one day I'm going to create that. The one day I'm going to go after that. How quickly would you go to, this needs to happen now. I need to stop, and need to start now. Stop procrastinating and start moving and taking actions. Then I think about the things that, we don't prioritize or think are so important, but what if, again, opening up our eyes to the time that we had left, how would that change? What things really mattered to us in our life? What things are priority and what things just really don't matter anymore, And I think it would, having that way of thinking would just ultimately, change so much in the everyday. Again, we wouldn't, put things off. We would appreciate, of course, things that are around us 10 times more, the things, the people, all of that stuff. And so, the reality is you don't know if we only got those 5 minutes or 5, years left in, our life or not. And I think it's important for us to start treating every day as if you were given the news that you only had 5 years left, because you don't know how true that could possibly be. I hope for all of us that we've got another 40, 50, 60 years. But again, I think if we think in this way, how it would shift just everything that we did every day on so many different levels. We would move more urgently because we're like, hey, time's running out. I've got a lot to get done in a little amount of time. I can't just be sitting around. I just can't be putting stuff off. I got to take care of this. I got to do that. I got to appreciate people more. I just think in even terms with how you would treat people, in general, if you knew you only had 5 years to live, things that maybe you would bicker or argue about or find distasteful in someone or not like about someone. Would you really care to waste time on little silly things that probably mean a whole lot of nothing anyways? Maybe a little argument, maybe again, the judgment of other people, about you, whatever it could be. Like, how many of those things then would be like, I don't even care about that. You do you, this and that. I got things to do. I'm on borrowed time right now. I got to go, I think about how ultimately it would just change everything in our lives. Because again, the reality is because we haven't been handed that crystal ball to say exactly how much time we've got left, we think we got forever. That's why we think we got time to be negative over here and time to just sit around over here. And one day I'll get around to doing the thing that I really want to do in life, because it just doesn't seem real at times, because we've lived, for however many years you've been on this planet for. But if we could think in terms of what if you only had 5 years left and there was a for certain, how could that change your world today? What things would you do differently? How would you move differently? Who would you become? What things now would then become important? What things wouldn't become important? What things would you waste your time on? And what things would you not waste your time with, right? I think having that view would allow us just to do so much more with what we got now, because we think we've got forever that we just kind of willy-nilly all over the place, right? Again, the truth here is this, my friends, is that we don't know how much time we have left, and we need to treat every single day as if we only got 5 years left, because I think having that ability to do so, it would allow us to do so much more with the time that we have here. Make things more urgent, prioritize things a little bit better, really sit down and think, okay, if I only got 5 years, like what do I want out of these 5 years of my life? What do I want to be? What do I want to, leave? What do I want to do while I'm here? What really matters? Who really matters? What things are important? What things are not? What things, should I put my energy and deserve my time in? And what things just I don't have time for because, I've only got a few years here left. If you could just see how that could really reframe everything about how we would live, I bet you it would change everything for the majority of us, if we had that certain news in our heads. I mean, you think about people who think they've got the rest of their lives, and then unfortunately something that happens with their health and doctors are telling them, hey, sorry, you got cancer, you got a few years left. Like, could you imagine what someone like that thinks, that all of a sudden things that, really maybe seem to be a big deal really don't matter that much, and what things now become a priority and what things are important. Time has an interesting way of doing that to us, right? And again, it just seems, because even though we know there's a reality to it, because we're still here, we think we've got forever because that's what we hope to, that's what we expect. So a lot of people who get the chance and opportunities to live until they're 80, 90, 100 years old, but that's not for everybody. That was never guaranteed. It was never a promise, and so if we live life that way, then we might miss the entire thing when time's up, and we thought we had more time, to live life, and then we realized that maybe, we don't. So the point of all this message, and hopefully it sounds, it all makes sense here to you, is that what if you only had that 5 years? What if you got news today, you had 5 years left to live? How much of what would change in your world today? How would you move different, talk different, think different, be different? And, metaphorically speaking, if you could just put that in your head, how much more could you get done? How many more things would you stop putting off and start pursuing and achieving and doing, knowing that you were on that time? I think once again, it would do quite a bit for all of us, because it would just then narrow down, our focus to what really mattered, what really deserved our time, what wasn't important, and things like that, and really help us get to where we want to. And the reason I believe we waste all this time is just because we don't have that focus, essentially, right? We think we got all the time in the world to make up our mind or get to this or do that. But the reality is we don't, and we just don't know how soon it's going to happen. But what if you what if you happen to find out that you only had a few years left? How much differently would your life look for you right now? I believe all of us would be a completely different person again, right? So, just something there to share with you. And it's just something I think about quite a bit, because I know, again, there's a reality that can happen sooner than later, right? Sooner than I want it to. And my hopes is that I can get everything that I can done before that time happens, right? And if I was given news, that I only got 5 years left, then I'd be doing exactly what I'm trying to do right now, and it's trying to move more urgently, trying to decide, what's a priority and what isn't, and what matters and what doesn't. It continues to shift the way I think about it every single day because, what if there was a truth to that? What if I get in a car accident a few years from now? I don't have time just to wait around. I don't have time to be like, God, tomorrow I'll get around to it. If it's going to happen sooner or later, I want to look back and be like, okay, I did everything that I wanted to do because I didn't waste time, right? So thank you guys so much for tuning into this week's episode. And as always, I will see you on the next one.